And welcome everyone. We are so glad that you could all join us for this fourth session on the second day of GLR week as we return again to the important topic of high impact tutoring. I say again because over the past 5 years, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has hosted more than a dozen sessions highlighting the power and potential of high impact tutoring as a smart investment and big bet strategy for accelerating academic recovery in the wake of the pandemic. Beginning with our first session on this topic way back in December of 2020. Since then, we've hosted sessions exploring the research behind this proven strategy, state policies to support scale, on-the-ground innovations, and mobilizing strategies to engage tutors, and much, much more. Just last week, as a part of our Technology Enhanced Teaching and Learning Summer Institute, we highlighted incredible tech innovations that are expanding access to tutoring, as well as maximizing the quality of both virtual and in-person supports. With the expiration of pandemic relief funding and other recent cuts, education budgets are incredibly tight right now, forcing tough choices for states and districts. As they wrestle with those hard questions, it's likely that they know the what, that tutoring works, and the why, that way too many kids are struggling far behind where we would like them to be right now. But what might stump them, and what we hope to shed some light on today, is some of the how questions. How can we ensure that we have a tutoring workforce trained and ready to deliver the supports that kids need to them affordably? And we have a rock star panel with us today who can help us to shed some light on that question. Many of them will probably be familiar faces to those of you who've joined us for previous sessions on this topic, along with a few new faces. We'll start off with a quick review of the current landscape of high impact tutoring, and then a refresher on the what and the why of this proven strategy. And then we'll do a deep dive into the how, exploring some workforce innovations that can be deployed in states and districts across the country to ensure that children receive the supports that they need. And to get that conversation started, let me welcome and introduce our rockstar panelists, sharing just very brief bios for each of them, but I'll drop a link to longer bios in the chat in just a second. Catherine Bassett serves as the CEO of the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, a nonprofit that emerged during the pandemic to deliver literacy and math tutoring to scholars in grades K through 8 in New Jersey. Monica Bott serves as the Senior Research Director in the Education Lab at the University of Chicago, where she currently leads the Personalized Learning Initiative, which is exploring how to scale high-dosage tutoring equitably. Kate Cochran serves as Managing Director of the Partnership for Student Success, based at the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University, an effort that emerged during the pandemic to recruit, train, and support hundreds of thousands of additional adults in evidence-based student support roles, including tutoring. Kevin Huffman is the founding CEO of Accelerate, a national initiative that seeks to embed high-impact tutoring and personalized learning into public schools. He's also the former Tennessee Commissioner of Education, among several other previous education-related roles. In addition to being a professor in Stanford's Graduate School of Education, Susanna Loeb is the founder and executive director of National Student Support Accelerator, which aims to expand access to relationship-based high-impact tutoring. Patrick Steck serves as the Vice President of External Affairs for Deans for Impact, which now leverages its nationwide efforts to strengthen how teachers are trained to also include strategies that tap these pre-service educators as tutors. And to guide us through today's conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Pete Lavarini. Pete serves as the Innovation Schools, or leads the Innovative Schools portfolio at the Overdeck Family Foundation, working to expand access to tech-enabled and student-centered K-9 learning environments, including significant investments in high-impact tutoring. What did I say? Rockstar panel. I'll pass it over to you now, Pete, to guide us through the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thanks to all of you for joining us today, including our rockstar panelists, who I consider to be some of the brightest minds working in this space right now. And a number of them I'm very proud to consider as friends. I'm really thrilled today to help moderate this important conversation about how we build and sustain a world-class tutoring workforce. We know that tutoring, when it's consistent, personalized, and aligned to what students are learning in the classroom, is one of the most effective ways to accelerate learning. And while the past few years have seen unprecedented investments in tutoring, particularly through ESSER funds, the momentum we build is at risk unless we solve some of the field's most pressing challenges, like building the scalable, sustainable pipeline of well-prepared tutors. This isn't just a workforce issue, it's a student success issue. Without enough high-quality tutors, we can't reach the students who need support the most. The good news is that we're seeing innovative strategies emerge across the country, from leveraging pre-service teachers and federal work-study students to building out apprenticeship models and stronger partnerships between higher ed and school systems. As Sarah mentioned, I have the privilege of leading the Overdeck Family Foundation's Innovative Schools portfolio, which is focused on making sure that proven learning interventions like tutoring can scale in ways that are both effective and cost-effective, ultimately improving both academic and social-emotional outcomes for students. That means supporting efforts to understand what works, for whom, and under what conditions, and today's conversation gets right at the heart of that. We brought together an incredible panel of researchers, nonprofit leaders, and policy experts who are on the front lines of this work. And together, they're going to help us unpack where the field is today, what's needed to support a robust tutor workforce, and how we can ensure that high-impact tutoring not only survives, but truly thrives in the years ahead. So with that, let's dive in. And let's start with Susanna. So Susanna, the National Student Support Accelerator has been a truly driving force behind efforts to understand and advance what works in terms of tutoring. So to set the stage for today's conversations, let's do some level setting by defining what we mean by high impact tutoring and what the research says about the impact of this kind of intensive structured intervention on student learning.
Thanks, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here with you and really this terrific panel today. So thank you for inviting me. So we all have a sense of what tutoring is broadly. It's an adult who's working with a student or a small group of students to help them gain some specific understanding or skill. And high impact tutoring is a specific type of tutoring that I think has two driving elements. The first is that it develops a close relationship between the student and the tutor that engages and motivates the student. And we know today that this aspect of tutoring is particularly important given the disengagement with schools that we've seen reflected in things like the high chronic absenteeism rate and other kind of measures of student disengagement. These supportive relationships between tutors and students is really the secret sauce of good tutoring. The second driving element of high impact tutoring is that it targets students' individual needs with intensive, high quality instruction to really accelerate learning. It teaches at the right level and with the right approaches to help students learn, and it does it often over an extended period of time. And this has shown really great results. Prior to the pandemic, it showed great results, and we're continuing to see these positive results, especially when the students actually get the tutoring. But in order to kind of get this great combination of relationship-based and personalized instruction, high-impact tutoring programs tend to share a few key elements, and I just wanted to give this as kind of a base so that we could all be on the same page of what it is. And the first element is basically the tutor. What's great is that lots of people can be effective tutors. They don't have to be master teachers. They don't have to know how to manage a classroom. But tutoring programs need to make sure that the tutor is consistent because that's how you get that relationship. And that means the student has the same tutor each time so that they can develop that motivating relationship. The tutor also needs to have supports to be effective as instructors, which often means kind of initial preparation and coaching, as well as good instructional materials, particularly if the tutors haven't been teachers before. So that's the first thing, is they need a consistent tutor. The second common element is the quantity of instruction. It needs to be high dosage, basically occurring at least 3 times a week for at least a term, and better for a full school year. The most common reason that we've been seeing since the pandemic that programs fail to be effective, and Monica will probably talk about this today too, because she's seen it and we've seen it, is that students don't actually get the tutoring. If students get the tutoring, they tend to learn. So that's really important, the quantity of instruction. The third common element, in addition to a consistent tutor and intensive instruction, is teaching at the right level. And for that, you need data. Regardless of the source of data, effective tutoring programs use student progress data to tailor instruction for the students. They link that data to high quality instructional materials so that the instruction focuses effectively on what the students need to learn. And I think there's lots of reasons that technology can help us get that data and that instructional material just right. The final kind of model specific element that's common to programs that are seeing strong effects is basically learning integration. Programs that are during the school day have more consistent attendance of students, and it reaches more students, so it's likely to give you much better outcomes. It allows you to reach students who you wouldn't be able to reach otherwise, and I think we've seen districts try lots of different things, and having tutoring during the school day is really important. In addition to these common program elements, good programs for tutoring are like good programs in general. They're well run and consistent and coherent. They keep students and their data safe. They treat students well. Running a tutoring program is not easy, and I think we'll have a bunch of conversations about it today, but it's doable. And if it's run well with these key elements, students can learn more than they possibly would otherwise. So just to sum it up, it's relationship-based, it's intensive, it's individualized, and we can do it in schools. Thanks.
What a great way to kick us off, Susanna. Thank you for all of that. I have so many questions, and I'm sure our audience does too. And so I'll use this as a reminder that there is a Q&A function, folks. So if you see at the bottom of the Zoom chat, if you have questions for any of our panelists, we're going to have a whole Q&A section at the last half hour or so of the call. So please add them there. I'm going to save my questions for later, Susanna, but thank you for starting that off. But Kevin, let's turn to you now and dig a little deeper into some of the shifts that we've seen in regards to tutoring in recent years. Accelerate launched in the spring of 2022. You've been promoting research, policy, and practice to support the adoption of an expansion of high impact tutoring in states and districts across the country. But the wake of the pandemic precipitated learning loss, and with significant federal relief dollars, so many states and districts are choosing to invest those funds in tutoring programs, many of which, thankfully, have been high-impact tutoring programs. Can you share a little bit more about what trends you've seen in terms of the high-impact tutoring expansion and growth over the past few years, and what has helped fuel that growth, and where are we now?
Sure. Thanks, Pete. And it's so great to be here. As I look at the webinar chat and scroll through all the different people who have joined, it reminds me that one of the great things about this space is it is an optimistic and entrepreneurial space. And at a time when kids have so many needs, it is so great to be around optimists and entrepreneurs. And high dosage tutoring has just pulled together a lot of optimists who are trying to do something. And I think, the growth of high dosage tutoring was fueled primarily by three things. And one is just that kids were way behind coming out of the pandemic. The second is that there was an increased understanding that tutoring worked. And, a lot of the people who are on this webinar contributed to that. But a growing body of knowledge that's still growing was digested by people. And then the third was the flexible funds through ESSER. And that led to a point where under federal surveys, each year, a higher number of school district superintendents and principals said that they intended to use high dosage tutoring as one of their strategies. And it showed that as more and more people adopted it, the word was spreading and more people were intending to do it. And a majority of districts had high dosage tutoring on their plans under ESSER relief, which was great. So that was all good. The body of knowledge was strong. The challenge, I think, that Susanna identified, and we'll probably all get into a little bit, is that dosage varied. And to be high dosage tutoring, it has to be high dosage. And the one thing I'd add on to Susanna's point is if you want to have high dosage, you have to track it and manage it. So there has to actually be accountability on the part of the people delivering the tutoring and the people managing the tutoring for ensuring that kids are getting the right number of sessions. And this is something that a lot of people have begun to focus more diligently on. There is still enormous interest. So one of the big questions on people's minds was, in a post-ESSER universe, would tutoring persist? And maybe with the change of federal administration, would there still be an interest in tutoring? And we are continuing to see positive signs on both fronts, even acknowledging all the challenges that are very real on the funding side. One, with the change in administration, this administration has identified tutoring in the context of ESSER extension waivers as something that districts could cite that they were going to put their money into. It has cited high dosage tutoring in the context of its AI policies in education. And so tutoring is on the minds of the administration, which is good because that wasn't a given. On the state side, despite the fact that there are tight budgets in a number of places, some states are putting high dosage tutoring directly into their budget. So just this past year, Florida, Louisiana, Arkansas, Washington, D.C. appropriated money that was specifically for high dosage tutoring in tight environments. And so they are prioritizing and saying that it needs to continue. And the evidence is continuing to grow. So we are all parts of studies that are continuing to identify how tutoring works for which kids in what contexts. And we need more and more of that. And I would say, as we think about where we need to be over the next few years, we need to get to a point where we can identify which groups of kids benefit from which kinds of tutoring and what the cost is for those kinds of tutoring and what are the sources of funding that might pay for them, so that we can package it all up so that districts and states have the chance to implement this at a greater scale. And I feel like we're on the path to doing that. So the last thing I would say, the effects are holding up when across a wide range of different kinds of tutoring. When we study tutoring and kids get the dosage, the effects are holding up. And we all need to be encouraged, and we all need to figure out how we can scale this.
Kevin, I love that. And it is a perfect tee up to bring in Monica into this conversation, because Monica, at the Education Lab and your Personalized Learning Initiative, you've been working with districts across the country to look into these questions that Kevin just named. What works for what kids, under what conditions, and how do we really make sure we can do it in a cost-effective way? So tell us a bit more about the highlights about what you've been learning from the PLI, the Personalized Learning Initiative, and what are you seeing in terms of these sustainable high-dosage tutoring models?
Sure. Just wanted to echo Susanna and Kevin to say thank you so much for having me and including me in this conversation. It really is such a joy, and I don't say that lightly, but it is joyful to be here in this room and reading the different locations where people are coming in from. Everybody is trying to figure this out together. And it really is heartwarming for someone like me who has been studying high dosage tutoring for over a decade now and is really interested in evidence-based policymaking. And this is really, I think, a good story. For those of you who don't know, and some of our partners are actually in this virtual room here, so hello to them and thank you. The Personalized Learning Initiative is a national initiative that we've been running since the pandemic. And since 2021, and includes 8 different jurisdictions across the country. We have a map that we can put up. I think Daniel was wondering if we could look at a map of the different jurisdictions we've been working on, but relevant to this conversation, across those 8 jurisdictions, which include charter networks, large districts like Chicago and Miami, the entire state of New Mexico, smaller districts like Winston-Salem, and a couple of other districts in North Carolina, South Carolina, Fulton County, Georgia. Across all of these varied geographic locations, districts and states are making decisions about what kinds of high dosage tutoring they can stand up given their local constraints. So an example of this is the entire workforce and tutor workforce in the state of New Mexico is virtual. because that's what works in that particular context. It's very different from Chicago Public Schools, which hired 500 part-time tutors to come in and push in to provide in-person tutoring in their schools. Now, one question you might have as a district or state policymaker is, how much of a difference does each of these decisions I'm making on the margin when it comes to student effectiveness? And so here I have some very good news, which is, one, we're finding across all of these 25 different program models across the past 4 years, across all of these jurisdictions, data is still coming in. But to Kevin's point, we're still finding tutoring is effective overall. And our analysis shows that the effect of participating in tutoring is about 1 or 2 months of additional learning, even though you can imagine that there's a lot of variability across sites. So point number 1 is, let's not give up on tutoring, because it still seems to be really effective in accelerating student learning. Point number 2 is, I mentioned the 25 different program models or program types. And we basically categorize these into lower cost models, which cost about $1,200 on average, and higher cost models, which cost about $2,000 on average. There's, again, considerable variability, but those are the 2 categories. And what we find is that the lower cost models can be just as effective as the higher cost models, at least in the places where we've been studying this. And so that is enormously, should lend enormous optimism in that we can reduce costs, oftentimes with the use of technology, and also preserve the effectiveness of this intervention when that technology is strategically deployed. And then the third thing that we're finding, which is to echo what Susanna and Kevin were saying, is that more minutes of tutoring correlate with greater learning gains. And I want to spend just a minute here, because I think it's a really important point for all of you who have some agency and jurisdiction about how tutoring gets deployed and how much of it kids are going to be getting. So essentially what we see right now, the guidance in the field is that you need to have tutoring 3 times a week in school, ideally 30 minutes per session. And that's what seems to be correlated with higher treatment effects. I think one thing that has brought up, at least in the personalized learning initiative, is that is what kids should be getting. But if you schedule a session for 30 minutes and then you have to walk down the hall to go get a student, bring them back, get them settled in, they log on, there's a tech issue. We've all been there before. For anybody who's been an educator, that's going to eat up, I don't know, 12 minutes of your 30. And so kids are getting a lot less of tutoring that they're actually going to be getting. And so thinking about the design of how you're accommodating just the realities of school and pep rallies and student absences and tutor absences and factoring all of those things into the fact that we actually want students to end up with 90 minutes of tutoring a week. And so we might actually have to schedule for a lot more. And one example is that in the pre-pandemic studies, we had students just get scheduled into tutoring. So on day 1, they go to their tutorial class. We worked with Chicago Public Schools to make sure that they could have this be a credit-bearing class, and we worked with the union to make sure that there could be somebody who could be a teacher on record in this tutorial class. And then they got a full year's worth of tutoring every single day, and we saw really large treatment effects there. And so maybe the last thing I'll add is that in the personalized learning initiative, what we actually see is that dosage, or the number of minutes that kids are getting, is actually almost literally and linearly correlated with student learning. There was a question in the Q&A, which was like, how much tutoring should kids get? And the answer is the more, the better. So on the next slide, I can show you an example of this. If you're interested in more, I can talk more about it, or it's in the report. But essentially, what we see are 2 things. One is that high dosage tutoring should be high dosage, and that requires us to figure out how to schedule consistent time in the school day, and that has implications for the workforce who can show up consistently, as Susanna mentioned. And then when it comes to sustainable models, something that we're seeing, which is very exciting, is that relationship seems to be even stronger. So in the sustainable models, and I think we'll pull it up here in the slide here in a second, in the next slide, in the sustainable models, you actually saw that kids are getting a lot fewer scheduled minutes than they were in the higher cost models, probably because there's not somebody there making sure that they're getting those minutes. That would be my hypothesis, but we'll find out for sure. But even despite getting less than 1,000 minutes during the entire school year, we see that relationship between minutes and student learning to be even steeper, even greater than in the sort of higher cost versions, which often relied on in-person models, though not exclusively. And so what that tells us is that these sustainable models have the potential to be even more effective if we can figure out how to schedule them into the school day and if we can actually have kids get them. So I think that's reason for optimism, but that's something that all of the people in this virtual room need to figure out together.
Yeah. I really love the sense of optimism coming all through these calls, because this slide is another slide that shows it works. It can work for all students, and it can work in a way that's much more affordable for schools and districts that are under really tight constraints right now. So really excited about this study and more study to come. Let's wrap up this section by trying to put all of this that we just heard together. So 2 questions for the group. One is what has changed about why we should care about opportunities for scaling and expanding access to tutoring, right? What do we really know now that we didn't know now that changes why we should still be banging the drum for more kids to have access to this? And then building on that, what have we learned about what needs to be true for tutoring to reach the students that are going to benefit the most from it?
I mean, let me just jump in with one piece of data that might be useful to people. We all know that NAEP was not great for the country, but some places actually did grow, and it was not uniformly bad. And when Harvard and Stanford put out their education recovery scorecard, and when they identified the 5 fastest growth states in reading recovery and in math recovery, overwhelmingly, these were states that have high dosage tutoring as a central part of their strategy. And we'll share the link on that. But it's striking, and I wouldn't say it's like this causal thing where you can prove that tutoring was the driver, but what you can prove is that the places that are recovering the fastest have this in their toolkit and believe that it's really important.
I just want to add into that because I love, I was amazed that that was true, and it was true. And so that was super exciting. I think what we also learned actually from all of this is that we can do this at scale. States can do it and districts can do it in ways that they didn't think they could before. And I think many of us knew for many years, for centuries almost, that this was a good approach for helping students learn. But what we weren't sure of is whether we could provide this to kind of all students who need it in schools regularly. And I think we have plenty of places that have shown that we can do that. And now that allows us to see that we can do more going forward.
Sorry, go ahead, Monica.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it feels like the equivalent of like leaving a $50 bill on the sidewalk. If we don't, like, we know that this works for kids. We know that there are kids who are gonna have really dire consequences if we don't, and we kind of have the wherewithal to do it, and we've got the resources. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but it does feel like a missed opportunity if we don't.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you, each of you, Susanna, Monica, Kevin. We're going to hear more from you at the end of the conversation, but let's turn now to Catherine, Kate, and Patrick, bring them into the conversation so we can learn more about how we can pick up those $50 bills on the sidewalk, as it were. So welcome, Catherine, welcome, Kate, welcome, Patrick. I want to start this part of the conversation by giving each of you an opportunity to give the folks on the call a quick introduction to your organization and particularly how it relates to tutoring. So, Catherine, we're going to start with you. Can you give us a quick snapshot of the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, what you do and where you're working?
Of course, thank you so much for this opportunity. We are a nonprofit statewide organization that has worked in 19 of 21 counties in New Jersey and now in Philadelphia as well. We tutor scholars in grades kindergarten through 8 typically, although we will go into 9th and 10th grade. if asked to, in both math and literacy. Our program is in person, and I love that Susanna and Monica both talked about the importance of those relationships. The relationships are key, and we have found that over and over again. And we do follow NSSA's recommendations of consistency, ratio, frequency, and duration. So Susanna, I was delighted to hear you talk about those. We've served over 15,000 scholars. We have a pool of over 400 tutors, and we offer 3 program models embedded during the school day, which about 87% of our district partners choose, after school and summer. And our summer programs tend to focus on our community partners, like our Boys and Girls Clubs. A little bit of data in school year 23-24, we're still working on our 24-25 report. 4% of our scholars were grade level proficient in math at the outset of our program, 26% at the close, 12% were grade level proficient in literacy at the start, 30% at the close. However, equally important to me and my team is that those scholars who were 2, 3, 4 grade levels behind, for whom achieving grade level proficiency in a 10 to 12 to 15 week program, less in the summer, was not going to be possible. Those scholars grew, and they grew significantly. High impact tutoring works. We are very proud to be the first program in the nation to be recognized as a tutor apprenticeship program, and have also earned the program design badge from the National Student Support Accelerator, and we're incredibly proud of that. So thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit of information about us.
Absolutely. Catherine, thank you for the work that you and the entire NJTC team are doing there. It's great. And I'm excited to dig in more in just a bit about the apprenticeship model that you're leading with too. Kate, what can you tell us about the Partnership for Student Success?
Yes, absolutely. And agreed. Also excited to be here and learn more about the great work the New Jersey Tutoring Corps is working on. So the Partnership for Student Success is a national coalition of schools, districts, nonprofit organizations, and higher education institutions who are all working to expand evidence-based and people-powered student supports for K-12 students nationwide. We're based at the Johns Hopkins Everyone Graduate Center, and we focus on the 5 evidence-based student supports that you see on my screen. High impact tutoring is obviously a big one of these, but we also have focus areas in mentoring, post-secondary transition coaching, student success coaching, and wraparound or integrated student supports, each of which has a pretty substantial research base behind its impact on young people. Our work started in 2022 as part of a presidential initiative called the National Partnership for Student Success, which worked to recruit more people into these roles to support pandemic recovery. And thanks to our broad coalition and others in the field, the initiative contributed to the recruitment of an estimated about 320,000 additional adults into these roles between 2022 and 2024, which was exciting progress, but we know there's a lot more work to do to ensure that all students who need these supports receive them. And so to support this, support implementation of tutoring and other evidence-based supports, we provide technical assistance. We host a lot of solutions networks and working groups to bring practitioners together to address pervasive challenges that they're facing related to implementation. And then we also develop publicly available tools, resources, conduct research, and most importantly, we lead strategic efforts to engage specific populations in jobs, volunteer roles, or career-connected learning opportunities, providing these K-12 student supports. And when I say specific populations, think college students, high school students, older adults and retirees, large groups of people who have provided the right opportunity, training, ongoing support will be well suited to serve in these roles and also motivated to serve in these roles.
Quick back of the envelope math, Kate. You mobilize 1% of Americans to become a tutor over the past 2 years. That's really impressive, right? That's amazing.
Well, not just tutors, but the
Yeah,
5
but
roles.
still,
But yes, it's really
yeah.
exciting to see significant numbers of adults across the country step up to support their local communities in ways that was not a given when we started the project.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Patrick, what's going on at Deans for Impact?
Yeah, thanks, Pete, and thanks to everyone at the campaign for grade level reading, for consistently curating and hosting such meaningful conversations like this one. So, for those that don't know us, Deans for Impact is a national nonprofit that believes that brilliance is equally distributed amongst students, but unfortunately, quality instruction is not. And so to create a reality where every teacher is confident and skilled in delivering really high quality instruction for students, we work across the country with three different audience groups that you see here on the screen. First, we work with our executive leaders of educator preparation programs of all types to hone their instructional vision for instructional quality and help them work with their teams and faculty to deploy that vision. And then with teachers and teacher educators, we work with them to redesign their clinical experiences and their coursework to better align to what the science tells us about what works for teaching kids. And finally, we work with policymakers and advocates to create the conditions that we believe are actually going to catalyze local efforts to make pathways into teaching more affordable and high quality. And so it's at the intersection of these three different audiences and work streams that we see the opportunity to mobilize aspiring teachers as tutors as a real national imperative, and why we're so glad to be in partnership with folks like Catherine at NJTC and Kate at Partnership for Student Success.
All right, let's get into the heart of the matter. So let's talk about some of these emerging tutor workforce strategies that can both support scaling and also allow programs and communities to tap into other funding streams, which we know are at a premium right now. And let's start with pre-service teachers. So Patrick, turning back to you, can you provide an overview for everyone here of the opportunity as it relates to pre-service teachers providing high impact tutoring, and then give us sort of a snapshot of the current state of it in terms of what kind of growth we've seen and in terms of the number of education schools and districts working together on this front?
Yeah, happy to. I really love how Susanna, Monica, and Kevin kind of like laid the framework for how effective an intervention high impact tutoring is to accelerate student learning. But at the same time, we know our communities face really pressing needs around staffing our schools with really high quality teachers. And so as Suzanne was closing out, she made a pretty bold statement that we can deliver this type of like high dosage, high impact intervention at scale. And at DFI, we asked the question, well, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to find all of these folks? And for us at DFI, we think that the more than 600,000 individuals currently enrolled in teacher preparation programs across the country represents the single largest untapped source of potential to get this effort to scale, so we don't leave that $50 bill kind of laying on the sidewalk, as Monica mentioned. And so again, for us, mobilizing aspiring teachers as tutors allows us to meet two challenges simultaneously. First and foremost is accelerating K-12 student learning, and second, and right behind it, is ensuring that our classrooms are like fully staffed by the best teachers. And the way we can do that is providing better practice experiences and at-bats for our most novice educators to move student thinking from point A to point B much earlier in their own development. And, when we think about the population of aspiring teachers in this country, I think many of us are probably guilty of imagining the dreamer who has always known that they want to be a teacher since childhood. But in today's teacher workforce market, that is like not the right image. It's part of the equation, but it's definitely not the totality of the equation. And so at Deans for Impact, we recognize the potential for our paraprofessionals, our substitutes, our bus drivers, and other auxiliary and support staff in our school communities, our retirees who left the profession a long time ago who want to come back in, and so many others who see teaching and education as an outlet for service as the total, as making up a bigger picture. And so I always think it's like important to name like who are these folks that we're talking about, and it's really the people in our communities who are actively engaging with our schools on a daily basis and trying to find ways to get them into the classroom. And then I think the last question you asked here, Pete, was around like, what's the take-up been? Our community is actually tapping this group of aspiring educators as tutors. And at Deans for Impact, we conduct an annual survey of our nearly 180 executive ed prep leaders each year. And in the last school year of that representative survey, we found that 32% of leaders were actively mobilizing their teacher candidates who are currently enrolled in their programs as high impact tutors in their communities. We think that's a really promising number, and we're actively conducting the survey right now, and hope to see that number have grown from last school year as we roll into the 25-26 school year. I'll just close by naming, while there's a lot of promise here, we also know there's a ton of work left to do, and I think we'll unpack some of that with Catherine and Kate momentarily. And for us at DFI, part of the problem that we need to address amongst this community is making sure that as we think about the structures that will allow aspiring teachers to access tutoring and create things like tutor to teacher pathways specifically, it's really quick, and often the easiest thing to do is focus on the structures around, like, what are the structural barriers around licenses and whatnot. And oftentimes we skip, well, what do these individuals need to actually be effective tutors? And are we actually training them to do so and helping them connect that training to their pre-service preparation as great educators over time?
Love that point. And I'm excited to hear Catherine speak to how the New Jersey Tutoring Corps is addressing this. So you guys provide a wonderful example of what this looks like on the ground. Can you tell us about how the New Jersey Tutoring Corps is building bridges between teacher prep programs in particular in school districts in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania? And I think you are muted, Catherine, if you don't mind coming off mute.
My apologies. Absolutely, and it's been such a privilege to work with both Patrick and Kate since our inception to do this work. I think that for New Jersey Tutoring Corps, in regard to pre-service educators, some of the first clinical experiences the pre-service educators have is with our organization in New Jersey in particular. And so getting them into classrooms very early in their education has been a really important component of our work. But to do that, we have to make sure not only are they right for our organization, but that they are right for the districts in which we will be placing them. And this has been so critically important because in some cases, and more than one, districts have actually hired our pre-service educators as full-time teachers post-graduation. So getting them into the classroom, building those relationships, having them work with them year over year has been incredibly important. We have worked to build a stronger pre-service candidate as our candidates are getting on the ground early and finding out if this profession is a good fit for them. And I've had many of our pre-service candidates come to me and say, this was so validating. I absolutely know now that this is what I want to do with the rest of my professional life. At the same time, I have had one person come to me and say, thank you for this opportunity because I have learned that this is not what I want to do. That is equally important. And so I'm very proud that we do work with our pre-service community so very closely. Advice for others looking to build these bridges would be to get to know the geography of your state, the preparation programs in your state and the districts located close to them. Find out what the culture is in those districts and in that pre-service program. Get to know the candidates that you are interviewing. Make sure that they will be a good fit for the culture of those districts, that they will know how to navigate the culture of those districts as they go into them. And most importantly, understand the scholars that they will be serving, that they can understand those scholars at each of those locations. We invest a great deal of time in training our tutors, pre-service, in-service, retired, the whole gamut that Kate mentioned. We hire all of them. And it's incredibly important that organizations like ours invest that time in training those potential tutors and finding out, are these people right for what we're going to be asking them to do? And if they're not, counseling them into another avenue. Finally, we have an on-site safety net in place for our tutors with site coordinators who manage logistics, make sure all the materials and people are there and doing what they're supposed to do, and instructional coaches who use a modified Danielson model to observe and coach weekly. And having these leaders on site is incredibly important and valuable for our tutors, but also for our partners, our districts, our community partners, and for these leaders themselves who are getting teacher leadership opportunity on the ground as part of our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I think one of the things I'm taking away from both what you just shared and Patrick, your framing of this is that if you are going to be leveraging pre-service teachers in this, you have to be really intentional about providing those pre-service teachers with the support they need to be successful in the classroom. Like that seems like the key lever there in a way that, I mean, it's important for all tutors to be highly trained and supported, but it does seem to be a key lever here for that folk. All right, so let's talk about another strategy for expanding the tutoring workforce, which is institutions of higher ed, which can be a source of tutors through the Federal Work-Study Program. And Patrick, turning back to you, can you just give us a sense of the insights and the potential of the Federal Work-Study as a pipeline for tutors? I'm probably not hopefully I'm not the only one here who, when you think of Federal Work-Study, you think of, working at the campus library for pizza money. This seems to be a little different about what we're talking about here. How have these community service roles expanded in recent years, especially as it relates to tutoring?
Yeah, thanks, V. And as someone who was a federal work study student and spent his time on campus stringing tennis rackets for the tennis team, I can attest to that it wasn't the best use of dollars for my community or my own educational aspirations. And so personally, I think that this longstanding federal program, represents one of the most unique opportunities to help get this effort to scale and really expose more folks to the joys of working with students and really giving back to our communities. And I think right now, in this particular time in our nation's history, it is even more of an opportunity as longstanding federal programs are actively being scrutinized and reformed right in front of us. This community should come together to figure out how we want federal work study to look in the years ahead, if we want it to still be here. And so over the last few years, in recent history and in partnership with Kate and the Partnership for Student Success, the Biden-Harris administration encouraged our higher ed partners to increase the number of community service federal work study positions from 7% to 15%. At DFI, we really wanted to see that number exceed 25% because we think that federal resources that are going to bolster student learning that's how we wanted the dollars to spend. But it was an incredible moment for the field, for higher ed to just say, hey, what can we do? And these little efforts, like what the Department of Ed did through its Dear Colleague letter, can be real, kind of like clarion calls for our local communities to kind of take action. And so that can't be overstated. In the first Trump administration, there was a experimental site initiative that actually created waivers and flexibilities for our higher ed partners, particularly our schools of education, to be able to compensate their teacher candidates for their clinical experiences, including their culminating student teaching, as well as other early field experiences like tutoring. And so at DFI, we think in the network of programs that we engage through what we reference as the Aspiring Teachers Tutors Network, think that there's a real opportunity to codify the flexibilities from the last two administrations and continue to think about how to further reform this to mobilize more aspiring teachers as tutors. And I think there's several local programs who are really leading on how to do this, because it's kind of complicated, as are many federal programs right now. And I think the best way to talk about how to do it is to tell an example of one. And so I wanted to raise up Step Up Tutoring, which is a nonprofit based out in California. I really think they're pioneering on how to mobilize federal work study students as tutors. And we're really fortunate that they're moving beyond California in this next year and going to be mobilizing federal work study students across 14 different states. And, in the last school year, they shared with me that they mobilized 725 federal work study students and are on track for over 1,200 in the upcoming year. And that is working institution by institution to formalize MOUs to make this a reality for those communities. And what I find most intriguing about the Step Up example is they're committed to collecting evidence about like what's working, and including like what's working for tutors and their own aspirations, career aspirations. And so in their most recent survey, they found that 82% of those 725 federal work study students are more likely to pursue a career in education and specifically teaching than they were prior to their service. And we can't understate like what that's doing for the pipeline of future teachers in this country when we're exposing them to the opportunity through opportunities like federal work study that are programs meant to make higher education more affordable for so many.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for bringing in that example of the Step Up tutoring team. Big fan of Sam and the whole team out there doing what they're doing. Kate, Partnership for Student Success. You guys have played a huge role in helping to encourage the growth of this pipeline. What are you seeing about the colleges that have really stepped up in the space to connect their students with tutoring opportunities?
And great example, Patrick. Really appreciate you pointing out the Step Up example. They're doing really exciting work, and I love that stat about the number of folks who are planning to pursue education. I didn't know that. Really exciting. Also, fun fact, I was a tutor as a federal work study student when I was in college. So
lived experience. That's
lived experience.
great.
But we need more. So we at the Partnership for Student Success have done a lot of work over the last 2.5 years or so to increase the number of college students serving in tutoring and other support roles, supporting K-12 students. But frankly, a lot of these roles are tutoring, in part because the federal work study regulations are particularly friendly to tutoring. There's a higher federal share of federal work study dollars can be paid for certain off-campus tutoring jobs than is the case for other off-campus community service jobs or other off-campus work study jobs in general, which makes federal work study a particularly exciting opportunity for tutoring. Not to mention that really engaging college students in these roles can be a win-win, whether it's through work study or other pathways to engage college students in tutoring. Districts get extra staff, often at no cost or at lower cost, because it's subsidized by the college students' federal work study award. Higher ed institutions often are really excited about this. When we first started this effort, we were worried that higher ed institutions would be hesitant to give up some of their labor at the library or at the writing center or whatever it was. But what we found was that many higher ed institutions were actually eager for opportunities that would improve relationships with their local communities. And also, they are required to dedicate a certain percentage, 7% of their federal work study dollars to community service efforts, which tutoring is included in that category. And some institutions, particularly in rural areas, particularly smaller institutions, often struggle to get to that 7%. And so when we encourage people to do this and also said, and we can share a list of high impact tutoring providers, a list of partners who might be excited about this, institutions were really, really stepped up to the challenge, which was really exciting. And as both Patrick and Catherine mentioned, this is also a really exciting opportunity for college students to kind of dip their toes in the field of education and see if it's the right fit for them. And regardless of whether it's the right fit for them, they're still gaining career-connected learning opportunities, competencies around relationship building, working with people across lines of difference, time management that are valuable to any employer. So as Patrick shared, we worked with the U.S. Department of Education to put out this call to action and really mobilize institutions of higher ed to think about using their federal work study for tutoring. And since then, we have about 80 higher ed institutions that have set either public or private goals to do this. And we know that the reach expands far beyond the folks who interact with us kind of on a weekly or monthly basis. And some of what we've done to support these efforts, we host a regular learning community that still operates, that brings practitioners from higher ed institutions and often their community partners together to talk through implementation challenges. Federal work study, like any federal funding stream, comes with logistical challenges for implementation, and having a space for financial aid officers, community engagement staff, et cetera, faculty to come together and really share, these are the challenges I'm facing in a safe space. And this is how somebody else, a peer at another institution, overcame this challenge to support kids has been really important.
Great. Thank you, Kate, Patrick. One final question before we move on to apprenticeships. Let's say I was a district, or let's say I was an institute of higher education, and I wanted to get started on this. What would be the first thing that I would do?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in first, Patrick. One of the biggest challenges that we often see with getting started is the establishment of partnerships and identifying kind of the right person for districts, identifying the right person at a higher ed institution. Because higher ed institutions are very siloed, or tend to be very siloed, there may be many different efforts going on in one higher ed institution. They may not know about other efforts. So there might be something in the School of Ed, there might be something in financial aid, something in career services. So reaching out to a number of different people is something that we recommend doing. We hear a lot, I reached out to the School of Ed and I didn't get a response. They're not doing anything. Maybe they may not be doing anything, but it doesn't mean that somebody in financial aid isn't doing something, or somebody in career services. So being persistent and also reaching out to a number of different contacts in a number of different departments. And we do have a toolkit on this topic, because we have, I think it'll be in the chat, that has some kind of practical strategies too.
Yeah, to build off of Kate and actually something Kevin shared in the first part of this discussion, is the first thing that leaders should do is ensure that this is a common opportunity for all, not as an optional add-on, but as a core part of how we prepare teachers and serve students. And I think that's where the conversation should kind of start. But then the question is like, okay, we're all on the same page. Now what, Pete? And I think the second thing folks need to really think about, and I've seen a few questions pop up here, is like, how can we work together to streamline our funding resources to make this an opportunity for everyone? Oftentimes programs like federal work study and apprenticeships that we're about to talk to state literacy initiatives, all come with like buckets of money that are often siloed, instead of thinking about how can we braid them together in really meaningful ways to serve more students. And then last but not least, for DFI, if you accomplish those first two things, then you also need to really pay attention to instructional quality. You can't just build a program without asking the question, what are the instructional outcomes we want for our teachers and students, as like a really robust starting place.
That's great. Thank you both. Okay, so as hinted earlier, we're going to get into our final strategy for diversifying and finding new tutors, and that's going to be apprenticeships. So Kate, you mind getting us started here on this one? Tell us how the apprenticeship pipeline has emerged this year and the current status of the work.
Absolutely. So just to provide some level setting to start, registered apprenticeship programs provide structured on-the-job training with related technical instruction to develop skilled workers in a range of fields. And recently we've seen a growing number of apprenticeships in the field of education, from teachers to early childhood professionals, et cetera. And we know that many high impact tutoring programs by design, as we heard from Susanna and Monica and Kevin, do really provide robust training, ongoing professional development, and structured on-the-job learning opportunities. But tutoring programs traditionally haven't really been connected with workforce development efforts like apprenticeships. And I'm glad Catherine's here, and we'll be speaking soon to her leadership and the work that she's doing in New Jersey. But we were really excited to see that the New Jersey Tutoring Corps recently became the first registered tutor apprenticeship that, as far as we know, has ever existed, which is really paving the way for other tutoring providers and districts to think about how they might align their training to high quality and effective workforce development efforts. and also for sponsors of registered apprenticeships in other education fields like teaching, to consider the role of tutors and if adding something like a tutor apprenticeship or a tutor pre-apprenticeship might be supportive to their broader efforts. A little bit about the current status. In April, the Partnership for Student Success partnered with Catherine and her team at the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, and Susanna's team at the National Student Support Accelerator, as well as the Pathways Alliance, to develop a set of national guideline standards for tutor apprenticeship programs. So in many professions, national guideline standards are standards approved by the U.S. Department of Labor that can be used as a template of sorts for employers to establish quality apprenticeship programs and also apply for apprenticeship funding from the U.S. Department of Labor. And it makes it easier both for the program to apply, but also for the Department of Labor representative who may be reviewing applications to see, they may not have seen a tutor apprenticeship application come in, but if there's this set of guideline standards, they can be more confident that it's aligned with high quality work. And so our working group, we just closed a public comment period for these standards last week, and we are working to integrate feedback and planning to submit those standards to the U.S. Department of Labor in the next week or so. And we'll be sharing more in the coming months when they will hopefully be approved, and we hope to release some additional implementation-focused resources to support the field following that.
That's great. Catherine, New Jersey, you guys have been at the forefront of this work. Tell us about it. What's the state of New Jersey doing on this front?
So what we're doing in New Jersey, first, I would like to give credit to my colleague, Ashley Benkin, our Chief of Staff, who is not only a visionary, but is also an innovator. And Ashley came to me with this idea, realizing that education funds were becoming more difficult to come by. And I had challenged my team to look at other avenues of funding. And she has always been invested throughout her career in workforce and brought this idea forward and really took the ball and ran with it. She worked very closely with the absolutely phenomenal Nicole Field, who is New Jersey's ATR or Apprenticeship Training Representative at the United States Department of Labor, to get New Jersey Tutoring Corps approved as an apprenticeship program. And unfortunately, first, we were approved as a substitute apprenticeship program. We work with substitutes, but that is not what we focus on. And so we very quickly had a conversation with the amazing Nicole and explained that tutoring is its own profession, and tutor needs to be recognized by the Department of Labor as an apprenticeship role. Nicole really bought into this and took it forward, and in record-breaking time was able to push through tutor as an approved apprenticeship role at the United States Department of Labor. And I just cannot give enough credit to Nicole and Ashley, and I truly wish that every state had access to Nicole. So that was our step one, was to get approved. And while we were going through the process of becoming approved, we also were working to build out what might this program look like should we get approved. And we built a series of partnerships. I am extremely proud of the partnerships that we have built. First with the New Jersey City University, and they have offered tuition assistance, credit hours for tutoring at either the undergraduate or graduate level. They have also helped us to think through some of the really difficult issues around what does tutoring look like as a profession, because through our program, you can opt to be a professional tutor, an expert tutor, or you can opt to take advantage of New Jersey City University's opportunities at the bachelor's or master's level and actually enter the field of education as an educator, should you choose to go that route. And I do have a slide that would show you what these different pathways look like, but I know that we're short on time, so let's just skip it for right now. We have built a pathway that allows districts, when they work with us, to access wage reimbursement discounts to overcome the costs of tutoring. So they are able to double the return on their investment by paying for a tutor that helps to close academic gaps, confidence gaps of their scholars, while cultivating that tutor to become one of their staff after they become credentialed. In addition to partnering with NJCU, we're also partnering with Connected Workforce, which is providing RTI in the form of training for our tutor apprentices, as well as assistance in completing New Jersey's certification requirements while serving as a tutor apprentice. In addition, we are working with the Teacher Apprenticeship Network. So once a tutor exits our tutor apprenticeship program, they can enter the Teacher Apprenticeship Network program and receive support in becoming credentialed as a teacher. Finally, the New Jersey Department of Labor has offered us a grant, which we have gladly taken advantage of, which has allowed us to get this program off the ground. And I know that we are out of time, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Catherine, for doing a much better job of watching the clock than I am doing as my job as a
I'm
moderator.
trying.
Appreciate that. But as you can see in the chat, folks in the audience, there's a long list of resources that Sarah and the team have been posting there, and I'm sure they're going to follow up afterwards with an email with full of these resources as well. So real quick, as we're transitioning to an all play, Kate, any other fun and innovative tutoring workforce solutions out there that we should talk about at a future webinar?
So we really always encourage districts, organizations, providers to think about the existing assets in their community. If you live in a community that is not proximate to a higher ed institution, engaging college students might not be the right fit for you, though there are a growing number of great virtual options, including step-up tutoring. But you know, if you are in a community where it might be hard to recruit tutor apprenticeships, maybe apprenticeships is not the right pathway for you. But really think about your population and who might be motivated and well suited to serve in these roles. Is it older adults and retirees in your community? Is it corporate volunteers if they're able to commit to the right the needed number of hours to make this high impact? I saw a question about high school students too, thinking about well-structured, well-supported peer tutoring efforts. Really think about the existing assets in your community.
Great. Appreciate that sentiment and advice. And let's turn to an all play now. So invite all of our panelists to come off, show your faces and come off. With the video. What's the opposite of mute? What's the term for? I don't know. We'll figure it out at a different time. And before we get into this question, just want to remind the audience that there is a Q&A function, and we're about to come up to the Q&A section. So please keep adding your phenomenal questions to the chat. All right. So question for everyone. We're going to start. Kevin, you're going to give us the first pass of this one. So we've spent the last hour or so outlining the case for high impact tutoring and highlighted so many opportunities for building the tutoring workforce. What does this mean for the folks listening today? What can the folks here today do to ensure that children continue to receive the tutoring and other supports that they need to succeed?
All right, let me start at the highest level. And this is why I have such deep respect for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So yesterday in the Washington Post, somebody wrote an op-ed that said there is no reading crisis. That was the title of their op-ed, and they basically said that the fact that 40% of kids scoring below basic on NAEP in fourth grade reading is not, in fact, a crisis. I think the people on this Zoom, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, would disagree. And I think that we have to have accountability for outcomes and data that shows where we actually are, because tutoring is an evidence-based solution. And evidence-based solutions come into demand when we actually know where kids are and when there is pressure on the system to actually deliver results. So I'm just such a believer that if we start to slide away from demanding that kids can perform on grade level and pushing for all of the resources that it takes to get kids to perform on grade level, we won't have the conditions for tutoring. We need the conditions for tutoring, which starts with a focus on outcomes and ensuring that kids who are behind get the resources they need.
I'll just jump in on Kevin's comment. And Kevin, thank you so much for making that point that data is so critical. I'm often asked by people who are looking for a tutoring provider, what should I look for? And one of the first things that I say is you should look for an organization that collects data at the outset and that collects data at the end of program. So something that we're very proud of at New Jersey Tutoring Corps is that we are externally evaluated every single cycle. And we are able to publicly share that data. It is on our website, it's in our social media, it's everywhere. And I think that that accountability, that data collection, that making sure that tutoring is measured, it is definitely measurable. Making sure that it is measured is a critical component of what a good tutoring program should be.
Yeah, and in this,
Sorry, you go, Patrick.
sorry, Susanna. In the spirit of Kevin's call to like focusing on outcomes, particularly in light of the WAPO article, I just want to like reinforce that all of us collectively need to treat tutoring not as a temporary intervention or an intervention separate from broader efforts to transform teaching and learning, but as a core strategy to support long-term student success and how we train our teachers. But for all of us on this screen and all of those listening, that means holding ourselves accountable to outcomes, not just for students, but also for the adults delivering tutoring. Because if the adults delivering the tutoring can't see themselves in the work, they're not going to be there to actually provide this resource to students.
Yeah, I love this. I'm surprised I'm not the one who's saying data, given that I love data so much. But I'll also just want to add to that, that I think what's really important is to believe that you can do this. We do have lots and lots of different ways that places have done it, so that if you see one way and you say, well, that's impossible in where I am, I can't do that where I am, there is another way. There are all sorts of different sources of tutors. In particular, we've talked about teacher preparation programs and work study and apprenticeships. There are also many underused paraprofessionals in schools that we could really restructure those positions to make sure students are getting this kind of personalized attention that they need. So really realize that it can be flexible. And I would think that some of the first things you want to do is decide what outcomes for students you really want to focus on. And we see that early reading is actually one of the easiest ones to do it, because early grades are quite flexible in building into the scheduling, whereas it gets harder in upper grades. But there are many places that might really need supports in, for example, in preparation for algebra, or in even in some of the durable goods. So really think about where you want to focus, and then think about all the options for the tutor supply that you would need to pull this off. But I really fundamentally believe that it's possible everywhere, but it's just going to be possible in different ways.
I might also just jump in to say, like, the reason that our school system is designed the way that it is because we had to educate a lot of kids all at the same time. And the world has moved on, and we have better technology now to be able to differentiate instruction, and not on the backs of teachers, and not expecting them to just be even more heroic than they already are. So I think high dosage tutoring provides a design solution to the way in which we educate students. And I think continuing on without adapting from that design perspective, you can see that kids are already kind of questioning the value proposition of schooling. Like, you can see that in the chronic absenteeism rates. So I think not adapting and pivoting to like how we know everyone learns isn't going to be good for the school system ultimately. And so if you think about the fact that in high income areas, there's something like 45 private tutoring centers per 1,000 kids. And in low income areas, there's something like 0.2 private tutoring centers per 1,000 kids. This is really just a way for us to kind of right size that and stop reinforcing this kind of structural inequality in student outcomes that Kevin talked about.
Great. Okay, now it's time for us to respond to some of the questions that the audience have asked. And thank you to our panelists for answering them in the chat in real time. But so that we all can learn from this, I do want to start. There's a couple questions in here about peer-to-peer or near-peer tutoring and the extent to which that those types of programs have been studied and could be a potential solution for communities that are looking for new or different sources of tutors. Monica, I think you had one response to this. Monica and Kevin, I saw you both have it. Do you mind speaking about what we know about these near peer or peer tutoring models?
Sure. I was actually going to say that we don't know a lot and we should
Well,
be
there we
doing
go.
research on that. The organization that I cited, Peer Teach, is one organization that I know of out of Stanford who is working on this, but there are lots of others as well. And just from a cost perspective and a scaling perspective, I think it's worth exploring because, you know, we can imagine that there could be benefits for the tutor as well as the tutee. But Kevin had a great point about the structured curriculum, and we need to learn a lot more about the student outcomes. So I'll pass it to Kevin to sort of make that point.
Yeah, numbers to say other people have said this, but I think the less experienced the tutor is, the more you need a very directed and structured curriculum.
Yeah.
And so in this case, that is particularly an acute need. But it's an interesting question whether the tutor benefits academically as well. I have not seen studies on that, but it seems like an interesting thing to flag.
There's an exciting question here I like around technology and AI as potential tutors. So I know, Susanna, you've been starting to study a little bit in this about what we know about how AI can help potentially solve some of these workforce challenges. What do we know about the efficacy of AI tutors at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we did one study where we actually created a tutor for the tutor, where while the tutor was tutoring, it could press a button and get suggestions of how to support a student when they made a mathematical mistake. So how do you help a student there? And we found that it was very effective. So often tutors will just want to solve the problem for the student, and that of course is not very helpful. So if we could just kind of nudge them towards other responses that more scaffolded, it can be really effective. And so I think that's one place that AI has been very effective. We've studied a program that does scheduling through an AI tool that I think can be really help get tutoring into schools. So I think the first thing to think about is how AI can help students get this human, personalized, motivating attention better. And I think there are lots of ways it can do that. Then there are things that Monica studied that I think is really interesting, where you have a tutor that's motivating and engaging, but then maybe we don't need it to be 4 days a week. We can have it be 2 days a week. And then that's enough to get the students excited to do it, so that then they can work on these AI tutors and be effective. So I think we've seen that can be an effective model as well. And the AI is quite good at providing good instruction in that way. They're just not, they don't have that human touch that right now seems to be needed for the more disconnected students. So there isn't very good evidence in terms of actual testing of these models yet on their own. For things like Conmigo and things like that. We haven't seen strong evidence on its own, but I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic that we can combine it if we can really pay close attention, as Kevin was saying, to how students are doing. And for those who need the more intensive work, that we really have adults there, because the last thing we want with these AI tools is for the kids who need them the most to be the least likely to get them. And so we want to make sure that they get the kind of human touch that they need to excel, as well as the higher income kids who have been getting it to a certain extent outside of school.
We worked with a program called Course Mojo this past year, and it basically takes, the teacher teaches the lesson, it's middle grades reading. Teacher teaches the lesson, and then the Course Mojo is doing the sort of personalized follow-up questions that are text driven, that are driving from using the large language model to drive from the curriculum that the student was using. And it showed very, very promising early results. So it's an interesting sort of mix of like the teacher teaches the core lesson, the AI is managing the follow-up, the teacher is getting real-time reports. All these things are very early stage. And I think there's real opportunity to figure out what does AI do particularly well and what do human beings do particularly well, and can we mix them together?
Thank you both of you for sharing what little we do know so far about AI and the potential promise and perils there. There's a lot of questions in the chat about the role of the state at this time, like either in terms of certification or potentially doing some new legislation to help there. And I'm wondering if the best way to ask this is sort of how might folks on this call create new allies at the state level to help them really advocate for the type of policies, legislation that could help them either bring new folks into the workforce or protect funding and things like that. Catherine, do you want to start with this? I know you've got I mean, besides I think you called her the amazing Nicole. Is there other advice you might have for folks on this call about starting to build a relationship with the folks at the state level that could support your work?
I think that if you're just starting to build those relationships, you're probably too late. Those
Okay.
relationships needed to be started from day one. And really getting to know the people within your Department of Education who oversee tutoring, for example, who oversee pre-service education, for example, getting to know them, getting to understand what they do. Because sometimes we don't understand what our colleagues at the Department of Education do and don't do, what they can and can't do. And understanding the various funding streams that the Departments of Education oversee and how they are accessed and what you need to do if you want to access one of those streams. Don't be afraid to reach out. When we reached out to Nicole at the U.S. Department of Labor, we didn't know her. You know, we had no idea anything about Nicole except that she was our ATR. So don't be afraid to reach out. Not reaching out means the answer is no, as my mother always said.
Yeah.
Does that help, Pete?
I think it builds off of what we heard from Kate and Patrick earlier, which is just it doesn't hurt to ask, right? So make that first step, build that first relationship, and go from there.
Can I jump in with two quick things on the state
Please.
thing?
Yeah.
So one is that tutoring is enormously popular in polling, and it polls well in red and blue states. It is one of the only apple pie things that is left in our public policy arena. And so I think you will find a receptive audience with legislators. One interesting thing that happened last week, ALEC, which is the very sort of conservative legislative group that puts out model legislation, typically like pretty right wing on different things, put out model legislation on high dosage tutoring. It's pretty good. And it's interesting because I think it shows the fact they don't put out that much model legislation. The fact that they are putting out a model legislative package on high dosage tutoring shows the extent to which actually there is support across the spectrum for increasing high dosage tutoring. And so I would just say you got to get in there and talk to your legislators.
Yeah. Patrick, I saw you come off mute. Do you want to add something here?
Yeah, in addition to what Kevin and Catherine are talking about like talk to your elected and appointed officials, you also can do so much work at home to uplift the notable efforts that you're all leading. So many stories are happening all across this country, and very few of them are actually like getting told in ways that can actually move in, or I think you framed it as build allies, Pete. And we can't underestimate the power of storytelling in this moment. And so I encourage everyone to like tell your stories, but then also like call your local and state media outlets and get a story running, because the more pieces of evidence like that exist, the more likely we are to get on the radars of policy leaders.
And just to build on this, there are lots of opportunities often for guidance even if you can't get changes, by just adding some guidance that it's fine to use these funds for it. And if you use it this way and not that way. And this is more evidence-based, or here are some examples of things that you should do. Those kinds of things can be really helpful for all of the education leaders who are making so many decisions, and this is just one of them. And so really thinking about how to get that guidance out there if at the state level, I think can be really useful.
Great. Well, we are almost at time. So two things. One, if you have not already completed the survey that popped up on your screen, please do. The folks at the CGLR take your responses very seriously when they're deciding about what type of program would be most useful to you. And let's close quickly with any final thoughts that the folks on this, any of our Rockstar panelists have for the audience on how to make sure that high impact tutoring in their communities is as effective for the students that need it as possible. Kate, do you want to go first? Got anything to say?
I think coming back to think about the assets that exist in your community and your state. I really like what I think it was Susanna said. This is doable, and there are a range of ways that it can be done well. There's no kind of one-size-fits-all model. This may look different in different communities, and that's part of the opportunity.
Any other closing thought, Patrick?
I can hop in. So I'll close with something I've tried to hit several times. But if you want better outcomes for kids and you want better prepared teachers, start by making tutoring a rite of passage for everyone who aspires to teach in your community.
And I'll just jump in with two thoughts. I interpreted your previous question, Pete, as Department of Education. Our legislators are our best friends. In New Jersey, they really are. They understand tutoring, they get it. Invite your legislators, invite your electeds, invite your Department of Education staff to come watch tutoring in action. In the past 3 weeks, we've had 3 different site visits amongst our legislators. And then my second thought is tap into the resources of NSSA, tap into the resources of Accelerate, into Monica's organization, join Deans for Impact, get to know Partnership for Student Success. These organizations are critical in terms of really understanding what's happening on the cusp, on the edge of tutoring.
Great. Well, I'll just say thank you. I am certainly leaving here optimistic about the future of high impact tutoring, particularly because of the folks like you who are leading this work. It's truly important. It's the work of the moment. So thank you to each of our panelists, and thank you for all of you on the call. And thank you, Sarah and the CGLR team for hosting this really important conversation.
Thank you, Pete, for guiding us through this conversation, and to all of our panelists for not only Monica reminding us that we need to pick up the $50 bills that we see when we're walking down the street, but also showing us how we can grab those $50 bills and invest them in our kids. Because I mean, yes, there's been so much hope and insights in today's conversation. So deep appreciation to every single one of you Rockstar panelists. I said you were rock stars, you delivered. Thank you to all of you who joined us for today's conversation. I've just dropped the link into the chat. We've got so much more scheduled for the rest of GLR week. We've got 4 more sessions in the next 2 days, exploring successful attendance strategies, engagement, what's working in Colorado and Virginia, impact to rural kids on the cuts and the policy shifts we've seen from HR 1 and other recent policies, how to build awareness and action around what we call ALICE families. So that's asset limited, income constrained, employed families who are earning just above the poverty line and really struggling to make ends meet, and how to balance equity and accountability in the current landscape of expanding choice. After GLR week, we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus with live programming, but lots of great sessions. Oh, sorry. We'll also have state events that are happening this week. But during the month of August, we will be rebroadcasting a series of sessions that we call our More Hopeful Futures, or Children as Collateral Damage, looking at some of those policy changes and funding cuts that have happened recently, with new footage that's going to be taped in the next couple of weeks to kind of bring us up to the current context on each of those issues. Hope you'll join us for those. And then in September, starting on September 2nd, we're going to return to live programming. I've dropped the links for our GLR Learning Tuesdays, peer exchange, Crucible Practice, and Funder to Funder sessions in the chat. And I hope you will all make plans to spend your fall with us as well. Thank you again to our panelists and to all of our attendees. So many great questions, so much great engagement in the chat. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of GLR Week 2025.